Good morning, everybody. Kirk Spano, Investing 2020s. We are just a few days past Turkey Day, Thanksgiving 2023. It is Saturday, November 25th, and we were just talking baseball off air. My big off-season prediction for the Milwaukee Brewers is that they make a mega deal with the Los Angeles Dodgers, 10 players. The Brewers sending out Corbin Burnes, Willie Adames, and Christian Yelich to the Dodgers for 7 prospects, including Michael Busch, who would become the Brewers' first baseman, Dalton Rushing, who in 2 or 3 years would become their catcher, and a whole bunch of minor league pitchers. So we will see if that comes to fruition. I don't expect the Brewers to receive any major league ready pitching because I think the Dodgers are going to go all in on a World Series in 2024. I think you see Clayton Kershaw come back for about the second half of the season. He gets his World Series ring. So I'm saying biggest deal of the offseason, Brewers and Dodgers, and the Dodgers go on to win the World Series. We'll see. All right, Bitcoin. What is it? I know that there's a lot of people who still haven't invested the time and energy into figuring this out. So we're going to do everything you need to know about Bitcoin, some evolution of it, where it's come, where it's going, and really what it is so that you understand why you should have money invested in Bitcoin. Bitcoin uses peer-to-peer technology, no middleman, no central authority like a Federal Reserve or other central bank. It's simply a ledger that is verified by thousands of verifiers who get paid to do the verification so that there are multiple entries, redundancy in the validation of a transaction. So if you wanted to get money, say from JP Morgan to your company, you use their network. It's their team that verifies it. You have to trust them. If you use Bitcoin to transfer money, you have thousands of people validating that everything is on the up and up, independent verification. That's the easiest way to understand it. It's not all the little details. It's just how you should understand it. And who would want to use this type of a system? Are you going to use it just to buy pizza? I don't think so. And that's an old joke. Look it up. One of the early people in Bitcoin spent 100 Bitcoin to buy a pizza. I think that was how the story goes. Clearly the most expensive pizza in history. Where Bitcoin has a role is in business to government transactions, government to government transactions, and for the super wealthy, and obviously criminals. But they're trying to clean that up right now. But criminals use all sorts of money, so that's not something that's unique to Bitcoin. Turns out the most used currency in criminal transactions is the almighty dollar. They seem to be okay with that. So understand that Bitcoin fulfills the functionality of money. Bitcoin is everything that money is, all 3 of the defining characteristics: store of value, a unit of account, and a medium of exchange. It means that it can set prices. It has its own price. It can go from you to them. And it's best, in my opinion, for big transactions. Fred Flintstone says buy Bitcoin. He's a little bit behind the curve. I was pounding the table a year ago. Bitcoin's up 254% since I recommended it, apparently. And it's going to keep going up. It's going to double 2 more times in the next several years. Could be faster because of some things that we're going to talk about today. If you'll remember, not only did I tell you to buy Bitcoin a year ago, this was in the wake, the news blitz of FTX collapsing. And Shooter did a really good job of covering the FTX collapse and a lot of the other bad things that were going on in crypto in 2022. He wrote everything up in 2021, and then he got bearish in 2022. He'll be a guest on our next show. Actually, I'm just the host. He's the star. But our theory on Bitcoin and all the cryptocurrencies and what we've been saying for 3 years, 4 years, is that the vast majority of cryptocurrency will go to zero. And that's because so many were created as a toy. The backbone of cryptocurrency is Bitcoin, by far the biggest. And then there's the infrastructure of cryptocurrency led by Ethereum and several challengers. Bitcoin serves as money. Think of it as a dollar. but in digital form and not the dollar. And think of Ethereum, it's like the banking system. I think that's the easiest way to do it. You've got the money, you've got the money handlers. Now, Bitcoin actually has its own network, but Ethereum and several competitors, we mentioned a year ago, Ripple and Chainlink. Take a look at their charts. They've also done pretty well because they are also getting adopted, including by international financial institutions and the big banks like Bank of America and the International Monetary Fund. Can't get validated too much more than that. Can't be too much more real than the biggest banks and biggest financial institutions saying, you're real. We're going to use you. And that's what I need all of you to get into your collective minds, is that it's not a Ponzi scheme like some guy at the bar said. It's not a rip-off mechanism like Sam Bankman-Fried made it seem like. I say fried because he's going to prison. There is rip-offs in finance all the time. People fall for these rip-offs generation after generation. Hucksters out there. It's the nature of capitalism, said Mr. Wonderful. So get over it. There's going to be scams and rip-offs because there's people involved. That doesn't mean that the whole system is bad. It just means anywhere there's people involved, there's going to be some bad spots. In line with the idea that there's adoption by the big financial institutions, I just picked Fidelity because I was looking at my son's account, which is 25% Grayscale Bitcoin Trust. I manage that for him. He's in his 20s. He's going to be aggressive. All of the major brokerages are getting into crypto and Bitcoin. They tell you what it is, what to consider, what are the risks, how can it impact your portfolio. What have I talked to you about the most with Bitcoin? What do I think Bitcoin is? It's a hedge against what? The dollar getting too strong. And I'm going to make an argument today that the dollar is going to get even stronger. And the U.S. Treasury market's going to be just fine because as this happens, the $25 trillion U.S. Treasury market will have no problem finding new buyers for U.S. Treasuries. Emerging markets are the backbone of my thesis, followed by other big investors, which we'll get into. Way back in 2020, while I was sheltering in place and catching up on television during COVID, this came out. The role of Bitcoin on developed and emerging markets, just based on user graph analysis. How more users of Bitcoin would lead to more users. Where have we heard about these types of inflection points lately? EVs. What we know is that once EVs got to 5 or 6% market share, that pretty much meant that they were destined to go higher. And since 2020, I've been telling you that the inflection point for EVs was about 2026 or 27, right? That time frame, because of when everything was going to be built and when ICE vehicles wouldn't be offered as much. Car companies are making the decision. By 26 and 27, price of an electric vehicle will be within $1,000 or $2,000 of an internal combustion engine vehicle. Shooter just got a heck of a deal on a truck, which shows that the inflation that we saw in car prices, and this is verified by Manheim, biggest car dealer out there, is showing that the inflation in car prices is basically over, and we are going to see a leveling for a little while, and then in 26 and 27, price of cars is going to go down. That's probably when we start talking about deflation again. And Bitcoin has a role in all of this because it is on the same type of adoption curve with the same type of impact, all part of this fourth industrial revolution that is going to validate how strong the American system is and the American economy is, and how the United States will lead generally through altruism and the idea that pulling the last couple of billion people out of poverty is a good thing that promotes peace and prosperity for more. Not all, but more. It helps us avoid things like World War III. How do I know this? Because the emerging markets are telling us that this is what's going to happen. Crypto has amplified financial risks in emerging markets. Central banks warned. I think that's kind of rich. The central banks warned about Bitcoin a few months ago. I'd like you to really think about why that would be. Why did the Bank of International Settlement, at the behest of central bankers, bitch about Bitcoin? It's pretty easy thing to figure out. Why would central bankers be afraid of Bitcoin? Could it be that some of the central banks are going to be going out of business? Do we really need 200 and some central banks on the planet? I don't think so. It hasn't worked. You have hyperinflation in countries that have no business having a central bank that can print money. While we do need a multipolar world when it comes to central banking, we don't need 200 poles. Maybe we need 1/10 of that, maybe 1/5, 20, 30, 40 central banks for regional economies, big economies, and maybe a few island economies, right? Your Singapores of the world. There's no functional reason why there should be 200 plus central banks. Argentina just had a libertarian economist win their election, and he's going to close their central bank, or at least I think extremely limit their powers, and give them just very specific functions for regulating and monitoring the dollarization, and for lack of a better word, maybe this is a new word, the Bitcoinization of the Argentinian economy. Why would they do that? Why would Argentina go to dollars and Bitcoin versus their peso? Well, how about they've had like over 100% inflation year over year for a few years? Because most emerging market currencies tied to their economies can't compete with the dollar, the euro, the yen, yuan, the rupee, even the Swiss franc. I will go out on a limb and say that Mexico is the next major economy to do this. It'll be the next president that does it. They'll dollarize and Bitcoinize, in part to wipe out a lot of the corruption and organized crime, both inside and outside the government. I'm not just talking drug cartels, because they don't care. Drug cartels will get wiped out when the United States cuts a deal with somebody there to let us send in Black Hawk helicopters and drones. And that's when that'll end. The dollarization and Bitcoinization of emerging markets economies has started, and there is no end until most of them have done it. There are reasons that the biggest emerging markets are turning to crypto, and that's as a dollar hedge. But the smaller ones are simply adopting dollars and Bitcoin to stabilize their economies. What I'm saying to you here is something that's very forward looking, and I think is going to happen. I think as the dollar gains strength and even wider use than it already has, and Bitcoin does the same, you're going to see, and I've mentioned Singapore a couple times, you are going to see tolerance for white collar crime plummet and the punishments become much more harsh. I want you to watch the Sam Bankman-Fried sentencing. I will predict that he will get near the maximum. I don't think he'll be free for at least 20 years. Go to jail, go directly to jail, do not pass go, do not collect 200 Bitcoin. Bitcoin has jumped on the news of the Argentinian election because the things that I've been telling you for 3 years, really 3.5, almost 4 years now, since CES 2020, which to me, again, was a pivotal moment. Best consumer electronics show in history of consumer electronics shows 2020, right before COVID, that nailed crypto and the fourth industrial revolution and clean energy. All those things were covered there, and they nailed them all. Everything that was talked about there. If you can go online and find the 2020 presentations, do it. Because all those things from nearly 4 years ago have progressed, some of them through a hype cycle, most of them now on the slope of enlightenment and adoption. Bitcoin's one of them. A year ago, it was half the price that it is now. It was a little lower. If you'll recall, back at the start of 2022, when everybody was saying that Bitcoin was going to 100,000, I said, yes, it will eventually, but it's going to go down to 20,000 first. And this is when I was in the 50s. Got ignored, laughed at, called dumb. You don't know what you're talking about, Spano. And then Bitcoin went down to under 20,000. When everybody was saying this is the end of Bitcoin, Sam Bankman-Fried blew it all up. It's over with. Central banks aren't going to allow it. Governments aren't going to allow it. Blah, 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 blah. Shorts talking their book and the ignorant parroting it back. I said, buy Bitcoin. And in particular, buy the Grayscale Bitcoin Trust, because it will eventually be an ETF. There's not a legal argument against it. Everything, in fact, supported it. It would have taken legislation from a bunch of Congress people who were bought and paid for to get rid of it. That wasn't going to happen. Now Bitcoin is more than doubled. People are like, oh, I missed it. You have not missed it. It is still not to its all-time highs. It's going to be volatile, so maybe you get a dip back down to, the lower 30s. I don't think it's going to breach 30,000 again. You should be dollar cost averaging into it. You should think of it the way that people have traditionally thought of gold and excess bank reserves. So if you're the type of person who like to keep $100,000 in the bank and 5 or 10% of your money in gold investments, stop keeping the extra money in the bank. Stop buying gold, especially gold ETFs and junk gold miners who have proven that they're in trouble. And by the way, we'll probably get a bunch of gold off an asteroid eventually. Buy Bitcoin instead. For those of you who still want gold, as I've said over and over again, don't buy the securities, buy the physical gold, little gold bars, gold jewelry that have additional value because it's jewelry, and coins that have historical value. That's where you get gold. That's why people still do diving expeditions to get gold, right? Because not only is it gold, but it's an old coin or old bar or old jewelry. Back to Bitcoin, Van Eck says where to invest now, emerging markets and Bitcoin. That's what we've been talking about. I've been preparing you for this for almost 2 years now. At some point, these were the trades. A year ago, I told you Bitcoin, and a couple months ago, I told you emerging markets. Beyond emerging markets, where's the other huge pile of money going to come from, right? After institutions, which we know is already happening, and we'll get to that in a second. In emerging markets, where's the other big pile of money going to come from for Bitcoin and some other cryptocurrencies? The super wealthy, family offices. You have companies now that specifically help family offices. A family office is generally 8, 9, or 10 figures of family wealth that is managed for the benefit of a family long term. Think Rockefellers. Say rocker because I heard somebody on TV saying it that way the other day and I thought it was funny. Right? Think just family trust money. These family trusts hold around half the money in the country. So if the family offices are buying Bitcoin, maybe it's a thing. Interestingly, back in May, Goldman Sachs pointed out that 32% of family offices already invest in digital assets. I told you back when the number was about 10%, right? About 2 years ago, I said about 10% of family offices were in digital assets. And by breaching that high single digit threshold, it was a thing. That's just how the curves work over and over and over and over again. Adoption leads to more adoption. Just got to get over that hurdle around 5%. Sometimes, depending on the asset or the thing, it's 3%. Sometimes it's 7%, but in that range. Once you start pushing 10%, that's it. It's a thing. Interestingly, a week or two later, Goldman Sachs pointed out that family offices last spring weren't buying digital assets at the moment, which proves that even the rich suffer from FOMO and fear of missing out, fear of losing money. And now all of a sudden they're starting to move back into it. More services for family offices. 40 crypto companies that can help family offices. It's a thing. These are the 3 biggest family offices holding big Bitcoin reserves. The Winklevosses basically put their Facebook money into Bitcoin. And then, I don't know, somebody from Switzerland and somebody from Hong Kong. Sounds rich to me. I pointed out a number of times in the last couple of months, Bitcoin would be over 100,000 by 2026. Meanwhile, on the other side of the world, Jim Cramer had been saying sell it. He issued an oopsie a couple days ago. Jim Cramer. He seems like a good guy to me, but he's so sucked into the system that anybody who listens to him had to really better understand where the things that come out of his mouth come from. Because for every good piece of information he gives you a bad one. So you're either flipping coins or you better know which is which. So what's the worst kept secret in Bitcoin, everybody? What is it? ETF. Why would the financial industry want there to be Bitcoin ETFs? Where'd it go? It was out of order. Because there's a lot of money to be made in it. Pretty easy to figure this one out. And that's why BlackRock just met with SEC officials to discuss their Bitcoin ETF. It's going to get launched early next year. And that combined with the Bitcoin mining halvening are really going to drive the price of Bitcoin up. It's basically a slight tap on the brakes of supply combined with massive demand. You could see a spike in Bitcoin to 100,000 by the end of next year. I don't know if it's going to be that fast, but it could happen. But regulations and criminality and blah, blah, blah. The SEC is, in fact, taking regulation very seriously. And what are they doing? They're prosecuting because most of the firms did not register as exchanges. They said, hey, you're supposed to be regulated and you chose not to be. You're getting penalized or put out of business. Meanwhile, the establishment, Fidelity, BlackRock, JP Morgan, Bank of America, they're opening up crypto divisions. Or really, they've been open a while, and now they're accelerating, putting their foot on the pedal. So the entrepreneurs and the rebels started Bitcoin, and now it's becoming institutionalized. And there will be more billionaires because there's a lot of Bitcoin in the hands of early adopters, and they haven't sold yet. And they dribble it into the market. They dribbled it in when it was in the 50s. The next time they dribble it in, it'll be on the next spike when it's in the hundreds. So this is from FS Insight. You see that the market cap of Bitcoin was over $1 trillion at one point. Right now, it's at about 2/3 of that. You're going to see the value of Bitcoin jump way up here at some point, way up here. Again, I don't know if Bitcoin's going to get to 1 million. It could. Supply and demand. Volatility will be there. So if you don't have just a big hunk to put in, and you haven't been dollar cost averaging like I've asked you to really since summer of 2020, figure out a way to dollar cost average in, buying the dips, but you want to get in faster than slower at this point. Think of this as kind of a last call to last call, right? The bar time is 2 a.m. Last call's at 1:30, but at 1 o'clock, I better get a couple drinks. Ethereum, I don't know that you have to own Ethereum. It moves in a pretty highly correlated way to Bitcoin. If you're a trader, you can play them off each other because the little wiggles in there, the jitterbugging, you might be able to trade. I know Shooter does. Not me. I just keep dollar cost averaging in the Bitcoin. It is about 12% of my net worth right now. I think that's high. I think that's aggressive. I really don't want more than 12% of my money in anything ever. Right now, I got about 12% of my money in one particular stock, small cap stock, micro cap stock. What's that? What was that company called again? Oh yeah, Ametis, AMTX. A couple videos out there on that one. And Bitcoin. I own a token amount of Ethereum, Ripple, and Chainlink. Not much. It's kind of my infrastructure basket for crypto. Bitcoin probably going to hit 40,000 soon. So, if you get a dip this coming week, last week of November, very often it's kind of a down week. But I think that by the end of this coming week, the market starts to look at the next Fed meeting. I think it's going to rally into it because even though Powell will say what he has to say about, hey, we got to be vigilant about inflation, everybody who studies it knows inflation is done for structural reasons. And the only inflationary risk out there is some sort of pop in energy, and that would be temporary. We know that the commercial banks are going to have problems because of commercial real estate loans. The Fed is going to have another, don't call it QE, another special facility, probably around $1 trillion to even out the banking system. That money will end up in the U.S. Treasury market, but it will create the ability for the banks to lend out money again, which of course will find its way into the banking, which will of course find its way into the real estate markets and stock markets. Stock markets first, real estate markets down the road. Expect the Fed funds rate to be somewhere in the threes. I'd say closer to 3 than 4 by around mid-year next year or sooner. I don't think it holds off longer than that. The commercial bank loans, $2 trillion of at-risk loans, the keys are going to be going back to the bank soon. For the reasons that I discussed, now you have narratives out there talking about how Bitcoin's going to rise and why it's going to rise. And it's all the things that I've told you. Things that I've told you over the last couple of years are becoming the narrative that will drive price, which will turn into FOMO and a spike in price. Again, I don't know exactly how long it takes, but again, I am saying Bitcoin will be over 100,000 within 3 years, and it could be in 2024. Certain stocks that we've been watching, and I've not really done much with Coinbase. They've been on and off our list, but BlackRock is tied pretty close to Coinbase. So I think Coinbase is probably the company you want to deal with if you want an investment in a crypto exchange that's not a Fidelity or a Schwab or something like that. Something that's more pure, right? More pure play. Sorry that I put an Investopedia article up, but I just wanted to highlight the Binance settlement. Basically getting rid of a Chinese entity in favor of an American entity. Think that one through. Kathy Woods gotten rid of some of her grayscale Bitcoin trust. Kirk, that's bearish. No, think it through. Why would she be selling the grayscale Bitcoin trust? She has a filing to have her own Bitcoin ETF where she'll get fees. She's just going to replace. Oh, sorry, I didn't log in. She's just going to replace her grayscale Bitcoin trust with her own ETF now that the discount is basically gone on grayscale Bitcoin trust. So it's down to 14% or something recently. I think it might be a little lower. Still the place for you to go. Unfortunately, there's not much of an options market in securities on Bitcoin, so you just have to do it in the futures market if you're educated in that. But earlier in the program, I talked about how Bitcoin was tied to other industries. It's important to EVs. Tesla has Bitcoin on their balance sheet. You might see cars getting bought and sold with Bitcoin because it's such a big industry and it's such a high ticket item. So they might allow people with that type of Bitcoin balance to buy their cars with Bitcoin. You know, specialized units, kind of like the wealth management units at financial firms, right? They're there, but unless you got a certain amount of money, you can't talk to them. I think that most of the car companies will have divisions for people who want to say, hey, I want to transfer you some Bitcoin for that, you know, Ford Mustang or Ford Lightning or whatever. But the Bitcoin miners in particular, because they got yelled at for using too much energy, have basically gone as green as any industry out there. And they're pushing the battery technology. And in fact, the Bitcoin miners, I believe it was in Texas they did this, shut down and redirected their energy to the grid when the grid needed it. I think there was a second state they did it in too. So I'm here to tell you, if you need to buy Bitcoin in an IRA right now, this is your vehicle, the Grayscale Bitcoin Trust. It's still at a slight discount. It eventually will trade at dollar for dollar Bitcoin pricing. But right now, you get some free money by buying this. You get to ride up the Bitcoin rise. Go to Coinbase or Fidelity or wherever you want to do business that is a US regulated registered entity. Buy your Bitcoin there to replace some of your bank assets, right? Not the stuff that you might use next month, but like your super emergency money. And in your IRAs, buy some Grayscale Bitcoin Trust. Again, I'm at 12%. My son is at 25%. I mean, he's real young. And Bitcoin has been the top performing asset since 2016. Stocks, QQQ, gold, alien jewelry, bonds, houses, commercial real estate. Pick an asset class. Bitcoin did better. Hands down, not even close. And even from the peak price in 2017, the first FOMO rally, if you had bought at Christmas in 2017, only QQQ has beaten it. Mainly because NVIDIA made money in what? Bitcoin mining and then AI. There are companies with Bitcoin on the balance sheet, and you can Google that. Square is my favorite because I think that they benefit from small business. Companies that have a real business, and by the way, have been accumulating Bitcoin, are pretty good businesses. People say, what about MicroStrategy? Man, their company kind of sucks at this point, but they make a little money in their tech business. I would much rather own Square, which is tied to the growth of the US economy through their real business. All right. I didn't pound the table. I let Fred do it. Buy Bitcoin. I've been telling you and telling you and telling you. I'm telling you again. And if I can see that your membership precedes this date and you ask me when Bitcoin is $100 and something $1,000 if you should be buying it, I'm not going to answer. I'm telling you to buy it now. All right. We'll be right back with Shooter for our Primary Waves program that you can find on our YouTube page. And he is going to tell us where Bitcoin might go on different sorts of catalysts. Ultimately, it's up, but we might get lucky and get a pullback. And I say lucky. We might get lucky to have a pullback. Be right back.